We thought we were fighting men. In Kuchi, we learned we were fighting the ground itself. I was a first lieutenant then, attached to an infantry company sent into what intelligence described as a suspected tunnel area northwest of Saigon. We had just over 100 men, engineers attached, artillery on call. On the map, it looked simple flat terrain, no hills, no obvious strong points. Kuchi didn't look like a battlefield at all. The land was open and dry, the soil a deep red that stained boots and uniforms alike. Villages were scattered, quiet, almost ordinary. There were no bunkers, no trenches, no enemy positions we could see. That absence should have scared us more than it did. Our boots sank slightly with every step. Not mud, something finer, almost dusty, clinging to fabric and weapon parts. The men joked at first, said it felt like walking on ash. The laughter faded quickly. The first sign that something was wrong didn't come from gunfire, it came from sound. One of the engineers probed the ground with a steel rod. It struck soil and then echoed, a hollow sound, dull but unmistakable. He tried again a few feet away. Same sound. There was space beneath us. That realization didn't hit all at once. It crept in, spreading through the platoon as quietly as the enemy itself. We'd been briefed about tunnels, but no briefing prepares you for the idea that the battlefield isn't just around you, it's under you. Every step after that felt heavier. The first shots came late in the morning. No muzzle flashes, no movement. One of our men dropped, screaming, clutching his leg. We hit the ground and fired into tree lines, bushes, anywhere that made sense. Nothing fired back. Then the shooting stopped. Just like that, we pulled the wounded man out, clean hit. Whoever fired had been close, close enough to see him clearly. But when we swept the area, we found nothing. No tracks, no shell casings, no sign of anyone leaving, only disturbed soil. By midday, it became obvious this wasn't a simple ambush. It was a system. Entrances hidden under termite mounds. Ventilation shafts disguised as natural depressions. Firing ports no wider than a fist. Tunnels that ran shallow in some places, deep in others, branching and looping in ways we couldn't map from the surface. They could rise, fire once or twice, disappear, and emerge somewhere else entirely. We controlled the surface. They controlled everything beneath it. Artillery was limited. Air support risked collapsing tunnels with our own men standing on top of them. For the first time, all our firepower meant very little. By late afternoon, the men began to move closer together without being told. Eyes dropped from the tree line to the ground at their feet. Every crack looked deliberate. Every mound of earth felt like a threat. You can fight an enemy you see. You cannot fight the feeling that the ground itself might open, swallow you, and close again without a sound. That night, when we set our perimeter, no one slept. There was no attack, no gunfire, just the certainty that beneath us, the war was still moving. The next morning, we were ordered to keep pushing. Command wanted confirmation, tunnel locations, estimates, something solid they could put on a map. From above, Kuchi still looked like empty ground that refused to cooperate. From where we stood, it felt alive. We moved slower now, not tactically slower, mentally slower. Every step was measured, tested, delayed. Engineers walked point steel probes tapping the earth in a rhythm that never stopped. Tap, step, tap, step, like we were crossing a frozen lake, waiting for it to crack. It didn't crack. It opened. One of the men vanished waist deep in a second. The ground gave way beneath him, collapsing into a narrow shaft. We dragged him out fast, hands gripping webbing and arms, hearts pounding. He was shaken, but alive. At the bottom of the hole, we could see darkness angling away, tight and deliberate. A doorway built into the earth. We sealed it with explosives. The blast kicked up red dust and shook the ground under our boots. For a moment, it felt like victory. Something destroyed, something finished. 10 minutes later, shots came from our left. Different direction, same distance. The realization settled in hard. Collapsing one entrance meant nothing. We weren't fighting holes, we were fighting a network. By noon, we had confirmed dozens of tunnel openings, some abandoned, some booby-trapped, some active. Punji stakes hidden under thin soil. Tripwires connected to grenades buried just deep enough to be invisible. The ground punished impatience. Men stopped talking unless they had to. Orders were shorter, voices lower. Nobody wanted to draw attention, even though we knew attention didn't matter anymore. The enemy didn't need to see us. They could hear us. They could feel us. At one point, we paused near what looked like an ordinary clearing. No cover, no structures, just dirt and scrub. Perfect place to regroup. I stopped them. I didn't know why at first, just instinct. Something about the way the ground dipped too evenly, like it had been shaped instead of eroded. The engineers checked it. A tunnel chamber sat directly beneath the center of the clearing, large enough to hold a squad. If we had rested there, we would have been standing on a ceiling thinner than plywood. That was when it hit me. The enemy didn't just know the terrain, they designed it. By late afternoon, heat and fear did what bullets hadn't. Men were exhausted without having fired more than a handful of rounds. You can only stay tense for so long before it starts eating at you. Hands shook, tempers flared, and died just as fast. And still, we hadn't really fought anyone. No charges, no assaults, no decisive moment, just pressure. That night, as we pulled back to set security, someone asked quietly whether the tunnels went under our perimeter too. No one answered, because none of us knew. And in Kuchi, not knowing was worse than contact. On the third day, they sent the tunnel team forward. Nobody volunteered. Names were read off instead. They were smaller men, usually, or at least men who looked like they could fit. Engineers, infantrymen with nerves that hadn't cracked yet, or men who had learned how to hide fear behind routine. We called them tunnel rats, but the name didn't capture what we were asking them to do. We were asking them to climb into the enemy's world. I watched the first one disappear into a hole no wider than a trash can lid. He took off his helmet, clipped a flashlight to his chest, pistol in hand, rope tied around his waist. Then he slid down and was gone. The ground swallowed him without a sound. We waited. 30 seconds. A minute. 2. Every man stood frozen, rifles pointed outward even though we all knew the threat wasn't out there. It was under us. Somewhere we couldn't aim. When the rope finally twitched, it felt like we had all exhaled at once. The report was simple. Tunnels ran deeper than expected. Multiple branches, traps everywhere, tight turns designed to force you to crawl blind, air so thick it burned your lungs, places where the tunnel narrowed suddenly like it was trying to choke you. And people. Not many, but enough. That was the worst part. They weren't ghosts. They weren't myths. They were there, close enough to hear breathing, to smell sweat, to feel movement through the dirt walls. They chose when to fight, and more often they chose not to. That afternoon, one of our men didn't come back up. The rope went slack. We didn't hear a shot. We didn't hear a scream. Just nothing. We dropped smoke into the hole, then grenades, then charges. The earth shook. Dust rolled out like breath from a lung. When it was over, the tunnel had collapsed inward on itself. We told ourselves that was the end of it. None of us believed it. By now, every man walked like the ground was made of glass. You could see it in their posture, knees slightly bent, steps careful, eyes fixed downward. Rifles were still held at the ready, but they felt secondary, useless against something that didn't present itself. Firepower meant nothing underground. You couldn't call in artillery on a feeling. You couldn't bomb a suspicion. You couldn't see where to apply force. That night, someone fired a flare straight down a tunnel entrance before we sealed it. The light disappeared instantly, swallowed by angles and turns we couldn't follow. It was like watching daylight die. I realized then why Kuchi broke units without major battles. It wasn't about casualties. It was about control. We didn't control when contact happened. We didn't control where it happened. We didn't even control whether it happened at all. The enemy decided all of that from below, patiently, methodically, while we burned energy and morale on the surface. By the end of the third day, men stopped asking when we would engage the enemy. They started asking when we were leaving, and no one had an answer. Because in Kuchi, you didn't win ground, you borrowed it, and the ground always wanted it back. By the fourth day, we stopped pretending this was a search and destroy mission. It was containment, survival, endurance. Command wanted progress reports, numbers, tunnel counts, estimates of enemy strength. I gave them what I could, but every report felt dishonest. How do you quantify something that refuses to show itself? How do you measure an enemy that chooses invisibility over confrontation? We swept the same ground again and again. Each time it looked unchanged, and each time it felt more hostile. The men knew the patterns now, where the soil looked too smooth, where vegetation grew a little too evenly, where ants avoided certain patches of earth. We learned to read the land like a language, but it was a language designed to lie. Midday, a booby trap took one of our sergeants. Not a dramatic blast, just a sharp crack and a sudden scream. Punji stakes, hidden under a thin layer of dirt, angled upward. Old design. Effective. It didn't kill him, but it didn't have to. Watching him carried out on a stretcher did more damage than a body count ever could. Morale dipped in a way I'd never seen before. Men weren't afraid of dying anymore. They were afraid of being taken, pulled down, trapped, erased, afraid of ending up in a hole that wouldn't even have the decency to mark their death. That fear changes how soldiers think. They rushed less. They hesitated more. Aggression drained away, replaced by caution so thick it bordered on paralysis. Every order to move felt like a gamble. Every pause felt like surrendering initiative. And still, the enemy stayed mostly silent. Occasional shots, a glimpse of movement that vanished before anyone could react. A tunnel entrance we swore hadn't been there an hour earlier. It was warfare measured in pressure, not explosions. Late that afternoon, we received word: pull back to the edge of the operational area. Prepare to rotate out within 48 hours. No cheers, no relief, just exhaustion. That night, as we set up a final perimeter, I walked the line alone. The men were quiet, staring down at the dirt more than into the jungle. Rifles rested against sandbags, but no one leaned on them. The ground demanded attention now, not the horizon. I knelt and pressed my palm against the soil. It was warm, dry, solid, and I knew it wasn't. Somewhere beneath my hand, the war was still moving, men crawling, waiting, listening, not for us to attack, but for us to leave. They didn't need to defeat us. They just needed to outlast us. By the time we pulled out, Cu Chi looked exactly the same as when we arrived. No captured positions, no clear victories, just disturbed earth and tired men. On paper, it would read like an incomplete operation. In reality, it was a lesson. We had come prepared to fight soldiers, formations, and firepower. Instead, we fought patience, design, depth, and we lost something we didn't know how to replace. Because in Cu Chi, you didn't fight an enemy you could see. You fought the ground, and the ground never surrendered. We left Cu Chi before dawn. There was no final firefight, no dramatic withdrawal under fire. Trucks rolled in quietly, men loaded up without talking, eyes still fixed on the ground, even as they stepped onto metal floors. No one relaxed until the engines started and the distance began to grow. As the base faded behind us, the land looked unchanged, flat, quiet, almost peaceful. If you didn't know what lay beneath it, you might have thought nothing had happened there at all. That was the final insult. Back at the rear area, officers asked the same questions they always did. How many tunnels destroyed? Estimated enemy losses? Lessons learned. I answered as best I could, but every response felt incomplete. The truth was harder to put into words. We hadn't been defeated tactically. We hadn't been overrun. We hadn't even been forced out firepower. We had been exhausted, not physically, though that too, but mentally, slowly, deliberately, without urgency. The tunnels had done what bullets couldn't. They denied us certainty, denied us control, denied us the simple relief of knowing where the enemy was. Weeks later, replacements rotated in. New units took over responsibility for the area. The maps changed colors, operations continued. On paper, the war moved forward, but I noticed something in the men who had been there. They flinched when walking across open ground. They watched soil more closely than tree lines. Some refused tunnel duty outright. Others went down once and never spoke about it again. Cu Chi followed them. It followed me. Years later, people would ask what it was like to fight there. They expected stories about ambushes, explosions, close calls. They wanted something concrete, something that fit their idea of war. I usually told them this instead. In Cu Chi, the enemy didn't charge. They didn't need to. They built a battlefield where patience was a weapon, and time did the killing. We brought superior firepower, technology, and numbers. They brought depth. And in the end, depth beat force. Because you can destroy a position, you can kill an enemy, you can occupy ground, but when the ground itself is part of the fight, you never really leave it. You just step away, knowing it's still there, waiting.